All right, welcome back to another beautiful episode of Naked Sunday. I'm your host, Caleb Leb Nelson. I'm here with my bro, Jason Ackerman, and we're excited for another great day here of just making it real, being authentic, having a good time. We're excited to start the second season. And all last season was all about forgiveness and how we've come to this place where the two of us are really nurturing this awesome relationship. But also we wanted to make sure this season we started to give you, the listeners, a little more context from where we're at, because if you better understand us as people, I think that we can become more relatable, and then hopefully our whatever we have to share can be a little more applicable for the listeners. So I like being on the chopping block. I like to be vulnerable. This is fun. So today Jason's taking the reins, and we're gonna take a little ride, see what Jay wants to know, and hopefully you enjoy the ride with us. So, bro, go for it.
Yeah, I think it's important to note season two, we're going to dive a little deeper into the two of us in an effort to help others. I think talking about general topics like we did, forgiveness and, scarcity and all these things are great, but it's also important to understand, where they come from within different people so you can hear Caleb's story and relate it to yourself. I think that's really my goal. And I think there's, for all of us, no better place to start than childhood, right? Everything, whether you're taking my mindset course or you listen to Caleb talk, you realize most of the things that manifest as adults stem somewhere deep, deep down. And, there's a reason. It's kind of a joke that, everything's like, it's your mom's fault. So Caleb, we'll figure it out if in fact it is your mom's fault. But let's start. You had that interview with your mom a couple weeks ago, which was great. And one of the things you spoke about, and you've spoken about in other episodes, is the fact that you're raised in a cult. So people hear that, and I think a lot of our listeners are probably CrossFit members, and they kind of get that joke of like, this is a cult. What, in fact, is a cult? Why were you in a cult?
So it's interesting you say that, because especially after my conversation with my mother and where I've grown over the years, I think the word cult is used in a very derogatory term. And you think of it more as like a high control group. That's what I would look at it as, right? And from anybody's perspective, especially if you want to talk the CrossFit perspective, from the outside looking in, I think there's the Every Second Counts movie where I think it's Wellborn who goes like, defining a cult is like you have a shared common set of values, you dress the same, you have similar terminology, things like that. So from that perspective, like anything could be a cult from that idea, right? Like a business, a family unit, a fitness ideology, whatever you want to call it. And and anybody could also, I think the perspective of high control is also massively subjective, right? So for me growing up, as I look at this, right, I looked at a lot of like, and part of the discussion I had with my mother is like, what I was really uniquely curious about as I started to get over my own shit, and started to realize like, it's not my mom's fault, it's not my dad's fault, it's nobody else's fault. Like, stuff was stuff, and I've, like, my fault, like I have to own my life. So if that's the case, like everything's my fault. That was probably the most liberating thing I considered. So I grew up, though, to give everybody context of what I was a part of we'll call it the religious organization or the cult, whatever word suits somebody, right? To put it into their perspective, other members of my family would have more the negative term. I'm somewhere in terms of like, this is my experience, this is where I grew, and I've learned a lot. But I grew up in something called with the organization called the Unification Church. And what I've told people is like kind of the bones of it, of what I've been affected by. Like my parents had there's no there, and I said this in the other episode. There's no premarital relationships. You have thereby you have an arranged marriage. So my parents actually had an arranged marriage, and I tell everybody like they were married in Madison Square Garden. They had a mass wedding, so that was something that was very unique about this organization. I don't know if they
How
still.
long did they know each other prior to that arranged marriage?
They lived on a shared
Like a commune.
a commune, something along those lines. I don't know how long they knew of each other, but they didn't have a, as from what I gather, they did not have like a any type of significant relationship in any way, shape, or form. Everybody's kind of like brother, sister, like we're all on the same thing. Like you're my family, I'm your family, like that kind of thing. It's all just shared. You know what most organizations start with, like, hey, we're about peace and love.
But
And
let's also not knock it. We're talking, nearly 40 years later, they're still together.
yeah, that was a big, that was all part of my realizations is like something worked, right? Like it couldn't all be bad because if it was, then I guess my life is bad. And then like that, what does that mean, right? So I was like, well, I have to be grateful. Like I was given life because of something that brought them together. Um,
You and
my
your siblings.
and my siblings, you know, and I have a tremendous new perspective and respect and admiration for my siblings and my parents because of it. And again, something unique happened where they are devoted to each other. Now, as I broke it down, I was like, that actually had to be their path. Something had to lead to that. You know, my mother and I shared some understandings. I've gotten to little bits of my father's story about how he got there. Not it's not super clear to me on certain things, but you know, they were going through what seemed like a lot of different relationship issues and things like that. And from my mother's perspective, at least, she found this, and it was like the first time where she could feel truly like okay and accepted for like being kind and being genuine and being authentic, at least to her best of her ability and to her understanding with other people, and was accepted for that. I'm going to assume something to the same effect for my father as well. I don't know exactly all the ins and outs of that, but you know, when I went through a breakup, what 8 9 years ago, something like that, that like that hit me pretty hard.
Which
And
one? Jambi?
no, no, I mean that was in and of its own. I paid. Uh, that one hurt later on. Actually, that was kind of like a delayed, like almost like whiplash. I got what I deserved out of that.
Really? I never knew that about you. I mean, I didn't realize that because I was around for the tail end of that relationship out of college and then the next few years even, and you seem fine.
Uh, I really questioned. You know what I realized is like I had to pay a price for how I ended things. I definitely was a very poor communicator. I definitely didn't know how with her, you know, I think that I cared more about proving to my parents that I could be in a long-term relationship, so that I could prove them that they were like, I like everything with my early relationships was a lot about proving like parents like wrong, like my way is going to work. So F you, this is my way.
All
Um,
right, that makes sense because I mean that was your really first college relationship that extended outside of college. You were dating at least through 2 4 years beyond college at that point.
yeah, we were together, I believe, all of 5.5 years, maybe six almost, and we were living together at that point at the end.
And I mean, and you definitely were having, a relationship with her parents. I mean, definitely, I knew you were young when you guys were together, but I also did believe you two would wind up together long term. And I guess, we'll take a step back in a moment, but yeah, I can see that where you were forcing it because you're like, hey, I left this cult or, this, the Unification Church. And that's really what I want to dive into today. But now I need to show you that this works too.
Right.
Like I met, and also we have to take into account this is 25 years after your parents' arranged marriage. Times have changed, again and again and again. Like everything is different. You going off to school in and of itself is a very different, place in life than your parents were when they had an arranged marriage. You can't send a young, good-looking, fit kid to a SUNY school and not expect him to date some girls.
Right. I mean, I'd already broken the seal in high school, and we'll get into that in a second. But to me, you know, a lot of things that I'm grateful to Sarah for was I definitely stayed out of a lot of trouble in college. Was I perfect? No, there was a couple times where I almost strayed, where she definitely fractured her trust in me, which completely understanding. Um, there was definitely like a lot of frustrations, obviously, between the two of us, young, and I was clearly just a terrible communicator, which to that effect, I
You
really.
can't you can't beat yourself up over that.
Right. I mean, when anybody listens to the episode with my mother, I put a lot of pressure on myself because when I told them like, hey, I don't agree with some of these things. Like, I wanted to do everything responsibly, and I wanted to like keep everybody's feelings intact and a lot of those things. But something I wish I was a little more forthright was like, how do I really feel, and be a better listener. I was definitely not great at that. I thought I was, um, and she taught a lot to me about that. And we had, I think we had known, if we were really honest with ourselves, at least if I'm honest with myself, I knew that it wasn't going to work out much longer beforehand. And I think that I did her a disservice by not being as open and forthright with like where I wanted to go with my life. And I think I was painting a picture of like, yeah, I want this to go to the distance. Again, everything's hindsight 2020. Confused, not understanding, massively insecure at that moment in my life. Not any of those excuses. They're just understandings of like, wow, if I'm not like solid on me, how can I be solid for somebody else? Um, and that I paid the price several times over thereafter. But the subsequent relationship, which I jumped immediately into right afterwards, um, when that came crashing down, for the first time in my life, I actually asked my mother for advice. And I think I mentioned in that episode when I talked with her, she was like floored that I even asked her some advice. And within like maybe like I don't know, a 2 to 4 week span, the conversation around like between both my parents came around of like why they loved each other and why they were with each other. And it was interesting because they uniquely said something very similar to each other, to the other person. And as I started to think about that over the subsequent years, I just realized like it was their experiences. They needed that path, right? The church provided that path for them, and a certain level of regimen and belief and organization, and we'll call it ritual, but really routine, right? That will help you define what your core values are. And they both bought in, at least at that time. I think my father's in an interesting place in his life now. They're still together, and they seem to have a happy marriage from my perspective as a son. But yeah, for me, as I described it with my mother, I think that what I didn't realize is I was quote unquote rejecting all of this, is a lot of my life for a long time was trying to prove that I was right, like my way about how I'm going to solve this, how do you find love solution was right? Because again, you're not allowed to date. I was, for lack of, was supposed to have a arranged marriage or something to that extent. There was going to be a matching, and then that was going to happen. And as I've talked to my parents, like I understand like the subcontext below that, right? Like you're going to give all of your faith and your love and your belief into this, and you're going to grow something behind that. Um, I understand it. Do I fully agree with some of the things, and at least the way it was executed? Well, it wasn't for me. For some people, it was. Um, but at least I appreciate where they came from. But I started to understand like that uniquely is what worked for both of them, and that's how they found each other. And I know some people that it didn't work for, um, but that's where my subsequent failures between all those other relations thereafter started to rear its ugly head. So yeah, that's kind of where I was going. I don't even know where the origination of that question was, but that's kind of me going off on a rant there.
Neither do I. But what I can tell you is, I think no matter what, if your parents come from a cult or they come from, they met each other in college like you, or any other, one of dozens of ways someone can meet, hundreds of ways they can meet, you're always going to have that, like, my way is the right way with your parents. And whether it's about relationships or whether, for me, oftentimes it's about work. When I was going to college, it was like, go get yourself a steady job like your mom was a teacher, your dad that's a dentist. Like, that's what you're supposed to do. And, you know, 25 years later, I've never done it. And I'm, you know, I think it's a constant battle to prove to your parents that not just I don't think it's so much your way is the right way, but more so like, hey, I'm okay. Like this works for me.
Yeah, I think that's what I really wanted all along. Is like I just wanted to be understood. Ironically, when I finally stopped caring about getting their approval and was like, Lexi just more or less scared the shit out of me because I was the most authentic version of myself that I could know of at that time. And I was like letting go of a lot of just like the trappings of what I thought success was supposed to be, whether it was with titles or money or, influence or whatever that was. Like all of those things were falling apart. Anyway, we started building this relationship, and that like terrified me. Like, oh my God, I might actually have what I said I wanted all along. Like the relationship that I thought was that what I like, if I really said I wanted it, it's here. And I remember, I think I went down to my parents' house for, I don't know what it was, but I'm sitting outside and I'm having a drink with my father, which by the way, that just never happened. And my dad didn't drink for 30 years. And I mean, now, ironically, now I stopped drinking, but, we're sitting out there. My youngest brother's sitting there and my brother gets up to like get us some refills. And my father just like quietly looks over me and just looks inside, kind of gives a nod over towards Lexi. I was like, so you're going to marry that girl? And that would just like flattened me. And I didn't even realize, I didn't even know how to respond. I was like, yeah. And then like a couple of weeks later, we're like, well, now I felt like strange because I finally had like this strange permission of like, I got everything I wanted. I even had my family on board with this thing. Now what? Oh shit. Like now you have to make a decision. Like you said, you wanted this, here you go. Like you got it. You got the approval. Which that was,
I also think it's your parents just truly want you to be happy.
I agree.
I don't think it mattered if it was Sarah or Tiff or Lexi or any other girl you dated. They, what you're thinking is like, I'm trying to show them they don't care. And I can speak firsthand. I mean, I introduced my parents to dozens of girls over the years, like way too many, like too quick, ones that I knew weren't going to last just because, they didn't necessarily live in town. So whenever they'd come visit, a different girl that I was dating would show up at dinner and they'd be like, who's this one? Blah, blah, blah. And, it'd always come down to like, you're going to marry this one? And I think for our parents, especially in that generation, growing up in the 60s and getting married in the 70s and 80s, they just wanted your kids to be happy. And I think there's a sense of pride knowing my stepmother says this to me quite often, and she's just like, we're just happy to know all of our kids are taken care of and with someone they love. And I think that's what they care about. I mean, I'm currently, out of my three, it's me and I have two sisters. I think over the years, any of my parents would have said, you're never getting married. Now I'm the only one of my siblings that's married. My youngest sister is in, a quote unquote marriage, but they've never been married. They're just living together forever. And I believe them to be happy. My older sister, who was married at 21, is divorced, but dating. So I think, they just want their kids to be happy. And I think they just consider marriage as, hey, you've got somebody, like you're going to be okay in this world. And I think that's the great part about marriage. As someone that put it off, I was talking to somebody recently about it, and I'm like, you have a teammate. Like, hey, we're going to battle, and you and I are going to battle at times, but at the end of the day, we're on the same team.
I agree. And probably the most empathy where I finally, I'll call it forgiveness, was understanding that, but it was more the sense of like wanting to protect, right? Like I just started to imagine like my mom must have gone through some pretty painful stuff. I think a lot of the things stemmed around from like my fear of upsetting her because, she's very passionate. She feels very deeply. She'll fucking let you know when she's upset, no problems. And she has a terrible poker face. And nobody wants to see their mom upset or disappointed in them, right? And she cared so much about making sure that I didn't get hurt the same way she has. And I don't know what that is, but I started to make the assumption of like, to make such a we'll call it drastic, especially I guess from the outside looking in, right? You know, in her mind, it doesn't seem that drastic, which again speaks to the unique experience that we all go through going through this life. And she opened up a lot. She's like, I didn't just like believe all of a sudden. Like I went through like, and she prayed a lot. She did a lot of, you know, whatever routine and things like that, which I kind of described like, hey, there's a lot of habit in terms of like kind of preparing yourself for whatever type of leap of faith you're going to make. When we had a separate conversation off the podcast. Um, but I started to really understand like, wow, she just wanted to protect me so bad. But the flip side, then I started to have the new conversation where there was like, was it, you know, I think there's a lot of parents who struggle with this. Like, are you trying to prepare the road for the child or the child for the road? And I think there's a hard acceptance around that. And, you know, I talked with my wife last night about like, you know, I'm preparing myself right now for the inevitability of wanting to have a child, and what kind of asking myself like, what kind of father do I want to be, and what do I believe in? What are some of my core tenets, and what are the things I hope to pass forward? I think there's so many people, and you see a lot in this current day and age, right? So we call it the helicopter parent and all that jazz, where like they get so upset if little Johnny boy, like somebody like disagreed with them. It's like, or like said something. It's like, that's life, right? And especially I think if anybody's ever owned a business, you and I were talking a lot about this before we haven't got on air. It's like, you're going to make a difference, or you're going to move forward in your life. Like you're going to get rejection. You're going to have people who don't like you. Like you need to learn how to deal with that. And the best way to deal with that is through exposure. Cause then you eventually realize like, okay, people reject you. People don't like you. Like it's not the end of the world. There's plenty of other.
Yeah, once, you know, I remember the first time someone didn't like me, take it to heart. The second time, it's a little less painful. And then by the, you know, 100th time, you're like, that's on you, dude.
Right. And that's what I started to question from her, is that like, you actually did set me up for that, but sometimes you got to let the, I think don't have a child, so I don't know. I don't know how hard that is to let go of the reins. I don't know from what other traumas and pains, like where you would feel so deeply that you need to hold on so dearly. Um, I don't know what influences that, but I know for myself what I've really reflected on, and you know, I've had a great privilege of watching and supporting Ian as he had his first two little boys. As we started the business, and like in the middle of the past few years, had a second kid. You know, watching him go through a lot of those things, we talk a lot about like, what does it mean to be a father? Where are we? How do you help raise them? How do you know, what does it take to help make just not make it to best prepare a young child for the uncertainties of life? And those are a lot of things that I started to reflect on. As like, you know, not every I couldn't be angry. Like not everything that did was bad. Like I have a very resolute way of looking at the light at the world. I have some very strong ethics, and like I can say this to a T. Like every last one of my siblings, you know, you strike a line in the sand with us and with our values. I don't give a shit what it is. Like you can't buy our loyalty. You can't buy our like value. You can't do that. Like that's not a thing for us. And I know distinctly I got that from my parents. We all definitely feel very deeply, which I think is important because, you know, each one of us, I find can be very impactful. We can be very empathetic towards other people. So, you know, I started to become very appreciative of these deeply wound beliefs that I was getting in part from them passing down some of their lessons from the church, you know. And push comes to shove, there wasn't that much difference. Like as I started studying other religions and other philosophies, I was like, there's some kind of the basic core tenets and all these things just happen to be their shade that work best for them. So, you know, it is what it is. You know, I'm not a huge, you know, religion with the big R. When I look at it, like where you start to make it like, this is the way and the only way. Well, if that was the truth, then like there wouldn't be so many different sects of Christianity alone, you know, let alone other things. Like there's so much different like Taoism and different type of Buddhism, you know, different like people have broken apart, and like I see this shade a little bit differently in the how, but ultimately we come back to like very similar core tenets. So, you know, I just realized like, oh, I was being ostracized for like, I just didn't want to do I was going for the same thing. I guess I should have, if hindsight 2020, if I was saying like, hey, I respect these things and I have similar core values, I'm going to go about it this way. Perhaps it would have landed better. Um, that's definitely how I aim to communicate in all my relationships nowadays. And to give everybody the option, like there's the choice, like this is where I'm going. Do you want to be on board with me? And that's okay. If it's not, like no fault of your own, you're not a bad person. We just see things differently and we don't have to make it something it's not. But if you want to share, like here's the rules and regs, like this is how I'm going to go about it, you know. Ironically, I've probably behaved in a fashion where I was very controlling and I was my own version of a high control group. So I myself, if you want to, I probably, and I played people who probably worked for me probably thought the same way. It's like, this guy's an asshole. He's a little dogmatic. I distinctly remember, and people will quote me on this, like there was times that I was kind of trying to like come to terms with stuff because I was just so passionate about whatever I was thinking at the time. I was like, I expect undying loyalty. And I was like, fuck me, like who nobody should be that loyal to me. Like I'm just a guy. What if we have differing views, you know? And what I started to break down was like, oh, I really just want people to actually be loyal to themselves, like the true authentic version of themselves. So I realized I was being authentic because I didn't really listen to what people said they truly wanted for themselves. I wanted them to want the same thing that I wanted. And that probably was a common theme in my romantic relationships, let alone my professional relationships. I'm sure you probably felt the same way from me at some point. So if you
Well, I was going to say, been there, done that, the exact same thing, in both business and relationships. I think a lot of our relationships at the time that we're referring to were very paralleled. And I think it became a lot of like, okay, plug and play, so to speak. And it's like, hey, this is what I liked about my previous girlfriend. I want you to not only have those exact characteristics, but I want you to have the other ones that she did not have.
right.
And if you don't have those currently, I need you to adapt and adopt them. But I think what's really important and to remember, especially as I, make the journey into fatherhood and you're talking about it and we're talking about your parents, is I think we forget that our parents were in the same shoes we are currently. We assume because they're older and they now have, 30, 40 years of experience as parents that they should have been perfect. But man, there was less opportunity in the 70s and 80s to learn how to be a parent than there is today. Maybe you grab a book, but nowadays between the internet and courses and, way more books and way more education, it's at least a lot easier to set yourself up for success. So I think it's important for anyone listening to think, you know, I would say 99% of parents are just doing their best. You always have those groups that are like, that are evil people, right? Let's ignore them and say, for the most part, parents want the best for their children. Now, that looks different for every set of parents, whether it's coming from a religious background or what have you. But I think your parents just want nothing but the best for you. But what I really want to dive in for a few moments is that point in time when you were around 17 years old, and you tell your parents, "Hey, this cult thing that you guys got going on, this isn't my jam. This is not for me."
Mm.
So, what what was that like? Because I mean, imagine at 17 years old, maybe you're a junior, maybe you're a senior in high school, and you have to have a nice set of balls to be able to approach your parents about that. And I'm sure there was a lot of thinking that went into it before you just sat them down at the kitchen table.
Yeah. So I distinctly remember the moment that I was like, that I don't agree with this. And there was, ironically, coming off the heels of a season of forgiveness, there was this, gosh, I want to say I was in fifth or sixth grade, which was a very unique time in my life. I think a friend of mine, his mother, my very close friend, his mother had just passed, and he was like a brother. She was like a second mother to me. She was amazing. So interesting times there, probably not realizing like I'm kind of questioning life in and of itself, coming into my own that same way as well. Like, oh, I'm kind of conscious. You start to become a little rebellious in terms of like, does everything lining up with what I really think? And I'm now in school. Like, that's also the age where like, oh, could you go to like boy girl parties and stuff like that? Like and I wasn't allowed to do any of those things. But there was this event, and I've thought a lot about this, where I'm like, I understand the depths of it, and I actually have kind of like in my own way gone through similar stuff on my own. But this event was you're supposed to go for it, and the purpose was to like repent for your ancestors' sins, and you can kind of like free them, and they'll be able to kind of like what you can let go, right? A lot of the things I learned, especially recently, was like a lot of stuff was like, how do we move on from the past, like traumas and stuff like that. I it just very recently kind of came to fruition to some of that understanding. But I remember I'm in this thing, and like this is like a huge tent. This is down in Westchester County in Sleepy Hollow, Terrytown, whatever. And so if anybody who knows like the Headless Horseman or anything like that, like there was a location down there, and there's like this big loud room. Like there was some like sermons, and there's like some unison prayer, like where people would like say their things, whatever. But at the end there was like this big unison prayer, so everybody was like praying on their own. And I remember like there's this like it just got really loud in this room. There's a guy banging on a drum in the middle, in the front of it. Like people were screaming. Like there's this little dude next to me like smacking himself. And I'm like, what? Like this for me it was like it was just so loud, and it was like staring me in the face. I'm like, something about this to me didn't add up.
And you're a kid at this point. You said you're in fifth grade-ish?
I think I'm like 10, 11 years old, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And, I
Sounds crazy for a kid. It sounds crazy for an adult.
right like, and I've been in some other big things, but like, and I for one, we've talked about this. Like I actually like really like quiet, peaceful, like serene moments. I don't like a lot of noise. I just like it calm. And I just remember I just had this moment like I'm out of here. I remember walking out, and like this is under like it's like, I mean, talking like huge like circus tent size thing, like just gigantic. I just walked out, and like I just have this vision of like walking out into the light, and like I don't remember anything else afterwards. But that moment like stuck with me. And then so for the next what 5, 6, 7 years, as I'm kind of like exploring this, I'm kind of just feeling like this buildup of like, and I didn't talk. Like people should know this. Like I didn't really say anything. I tried to be respectful. I kind of had my thing like behind closed doors with my friends, playing like video games at my house. Like that was it. I didn't leave my house too much. I played sports so I can kind of like mingle, and I was decent enough at sports that I could be accepted, but I like was never close to people. That was one thing I really have like started to learn. Like I craved feeling like I belonged. That's why like when I got to work at Albany, where I felt like I had a little bit of like say in how things were, I could be kind of almost like admired for being good at like decent enough as a athlete, whatever, even though, hindsight 2020, I was barely okay. And having a little bit of like, oh, like some accolades and feeling like important, feeling like valued for whatever I was doing at the time. I just remember like constant like building up of tension. Like I just don't feel like I'm speaking truthfully about like what I am seeing. Now, again, don't have the words, didn't infringe that much upon me. Like it wasn't stopping me from anything, because I didn't have opportunity or access to to change anything. But when I was a junior, there was a girl in my French class that like, and I was like the only dude. Now I was lazy. Like I was very good in school. I didn't study. I got straight A's. Like I just didn't try. And I thought like that was cool. So I was accepted by my parents for like I wasn't a troublemaker. I did decent in sports. Like I was fine. And so I'm like on the surface, like, what can you be upset about with me? But there was this girl in this class, and I was like one of maybe two guys in this. And then towards the end of the year, we had to do some group project or whatever. And all the girls were over. And this was like the first time like my parents were cool, like having girls in the house, and they could just tell something was up. And I had a thing for this girl, and one night before, like I was going to get invited to go to something, I can't remember what it was, where I was like, okay, I'm going to be out on my own, not home, nothing of this nature. Like you can't really tell me no, because I can just get up and go. Somebody can pick me up and I can leave at this point. I mean, I sat him down, and it was just like the greatest high and the greatest anxiety of my entire life. Of course, to that moment, I've had plenty of other bigger fears and scares. Even as part of our own separation was one of those moments. Very similar feeling. And I just sat down. I was like, "Hey, I wanted to let you know, like this is what's going on. There, like nothing has happened yet. and I don't know, but if something does, like, I'm going to go for it. And it wasn't a very long conversation. Like, I was more or less saying, like, I don't agree with what you guys are talking about. I probably was a little more rude, and then I probably said something. I was like, I think you're fucking up. Like, whatever. Like every asshole teenager, like so bold as me, like thinking I know everything about the world, truly realizing I don't. Like now, I'm like, you didn't know a damn thing about anything. And I was like, if something happens, whatever. And they're like, cool. There's gonna be consequences if you do. Left it at that. I just walked into the house. Like, I was just like in tears, just like pissed off. Sure enough, something happens. My parents call me because I left to go to this thing. I think it was like some music thing. I can't even remember exactly what it was. Some concert, some school concert. I don't know. And I get a call from them, or I call them, I think. And I said, like, yeah, it's happening. And then they're like, yep, cool. And then it went into this whole thing. Like, we just like,
Wait, so what was happening? You were gonna hang out with this girl?
yeah. And then it became a thing. Like, we were dating. And yeah,
Okay, so really the whole sentiment is, hey, mom and dad, I don't agree with this religious belief of an arranged marriage and going along with this. I'm gonna date this girl from my French class.
basically. Yeah.
And I think I think if you take a step back, you realize there is some maturity to that. You could have tried to do it behind their back. You didn't have to necessarily. I'm sure you didn't do it as eloquently as you're laying out, like you said.
Not even.
But but the fact that you even had the gumption to say, "Hey, mom and dad, can I talk to you?" I don't remember having any mature conversations with I to this day, let alone when I was 18. So I think there's some you know there's something to be proud of in there. And then were there any consequences?
Yeah. So they, well, to this effect, I should say, like on the episode with my mom, she like described to me that conversation and how she looked at it. And she was actually, I thought that was very responsible. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. I thought you were just pissed at me. So, I guess perhaps like the bones of what I was really trying to get through, like I do want to respect what you guys are, but I just think differently. So, whatever that means, it took 15 years to like hear that, but it was worth it. Um, I think they were paying for like my gym membership at the time somewhere. I think I was at Club Fit, and I just didn't have access to my money. But whatever, I'm 17 and I kind of didn't need anything. And I just kind of like it was that like we just stopped talking for. You and I stopped talking for what 9 months. I didn't talk to my family for, or maybe no, you guys didn't. You and I like literally didn't exchange words for what almost a year as we were going through our separation, and then didn't talk for 7 years. So I'm like, I guess I had prepared myself in dosages before that. I don't think I talked to my parents for 3 months. And
Which is hard. I mean, we weren't living under the same roof.
right. So like I would come home, hindsight 2020, like, was I really punished that bad? No. I still could come home if I wanted to. I could still have food if I wanted to.
And you did. You lived at home. You didn't live on the streets during this time.
And my biggest regret there as I look back is like I didn't clue this girl in at all, and like at all as to what was going on at home. I think she like didn't realize until the end. And I feel bad because like I inadvertently put all this unknown pressure on this girl to like more or less be like my savior of like this has to work because I need to prove them that like early on I'm like everything has to be all or nothing, otherwise like I'm not going to get another shot at like making things right.
Meanwhile, you're in high school.
Meanwhile, I'm in high school and I have no concept, right? Zero concept that like life goes on, just keep going. But young boy who's brokenhearted, and first time he's talking about whatever his feelings. She was a year older than me, and probably was like a blessing. A year older than me, went off to college. She wanted to do her own thing, and like she did what like end of the summer she broke it off and it was fine. Well, not fine. Like I was like a little baby and just like upset, like had my heart broken. But then I like had to go back, tail between my legs, tell my parents like this and that. My mom, like you could tell there was like this feeling of like, okay, he's back now, and I was just like, no, like it's not like there's no going back now. Like I'm in. And there was that kind of unique thing about our relationship, but I think it really set into motion during that time. They're like I don't want you to be around the house because I don't want your siblings to see this, which I respect. It's like, okay, they're influential. Like, I'm making my own unique decision. They still have their way of how they want to parent. Like, who the fuck am I to tell them how to like raise their own kids? Like, I didn't raise them. I didn't pay for them. I didn't feed them. I didn't put a roof over their head. Like, that was not me, you know? And so I tried to be as respectful of that. I just wasn't there. I just literally wasn't home for a few months. I remember I came home like really late once and they had like called the cops because I just was out, to that effect. I wasn't super respectful. I just didn't clue them in. And I thought like, well, fuck you. You're going to say fuck you to me. Like, now you don't get to know and you don't deserve like any heads up. Again, just being spiteful as a 17-year-old boy. Um, but, you know, for me, that was ironically, I have them to thank because at some point it was a lot of like, I even have my mother to thank because I remember how she has spoken so devoutly. And I think I told her so much. I'm like, Mom, the one thing I probably am so envious of you is like this unbelievably strong, devout faith that you have. And you'll just stand up against it no matter what. Like, push comes to shove, it is what it is. Don't give a shit. And that's pretty, especially in a day and age where there's cancel culture and there's everything and everybody's offended about something. Like, she believes, and there's a lot of people in this world that are just lost looking for something to believe in, and she has that, and she definitely didn't come to that lightly, especially where I'm at in my life. Like, I didn't come to some of the realizations where I came to lightly. This very act of you and I going through this together is not something I just gently thought about. Like, I've thought about it for years, to like be like, wow, to reinvest in this, to rebuild this, to see where this is going to go. It took a lot. It took a lot of looking at like, who am I as a man? Where do I want to, what kind of example do I want to set for my future that isn't even here? Like, the people that are going to look up to me, that I hope they give a shit about what I have to do. What's my legacy? So to that effect, she taught me, stand up for what you believe in. Just happen to not believe in the same exact thing. So it's kind of the ironic twist around some of those things that, I'm probably going to get a heavy dose of my own medicine from my own kids one day, if I'm so lucky. I've gotten plenty of a dose of my own medicine, as they say, like, karma's a bitch, for all my failures in my relationships and all my my poor communication, if you will. But I'm grateful for all those things because now I get to. My hope is that because of that, I'm able to give my wife and then hopefully my future offspring and hopefully the people that choose to share their life with me going forward, friends and business partners and clients alike, that we can share something really meaningful and I can be a better service. So hopefully, anybody who I have wronged, hopefully my version of paying it forward like that is, it knows that it wasn't gone to waste. Your suffering did not go to waste. But yeah.
Well, from what I hear is that was one of your first lessons and something we spoke about in season one, ownership, empathy, appreciation. You're taking ownership of it, but you also have empathy for your parents. And now you have appreciation. And I don't think you would have the ability to look at things from that light and that perspective had you not gone through it, 15, 20 years ago. So I think it's like anything. We look at our parents as the reasons for our failures, but not often as the reason for our successes. And like I said earlier, I think if we look at our parents as, hey, they just did their best, given what they could, it can change the way we look at them. I think that it's tremendous. I mean, it took, like I said earlier, it took a lot of courage to do what you did. And it's great to see that all these years later, because of that, it's still impacting you, but it's also come full circle and you're able to discuss it with your mom. She's able to see your perspective and you're able to have an even greater relationship because of it.
Yeah, it's the irony. Like, if you're willing to do it, I had this little thought the other day that catharsis don't come cheap. And you can quote me on that if you want.
Yeah.
You're writing it down. And during this entire COVID quarantine, whatever it is, like, it's been a cause for those things. There's been a lot of things that I've had to put a lot of work in, and a lot of just like eating some crow, repenting, saying sorry, and not like just like, hey, I'm gonna say sorry. It's like I had to do some work of like, I'm gonna have to show them like, I'm gonna have to own up to my stuff. I'm gonna have to do some follow through. I'm gonna have to rebuild some trust. Um, and from the flip side, on the couple of situations, yours and my relationship being one of them, my relationship with my mother, the different relationship I have with my siblings now, a couple other friends, like on the flip sides, taking a stand is great, but make sure you go back and you, if you don't think about like some of the trauma you might be leaving, like it's worth respecting that. It's worth understanding like, what did I do? What did I like? Yes, we are not perfect, and yes, we could just say like chalk it up to that guy, I didn't know. But if we have the opportunity to go back and say, hey, I'm sorry, if I have the opportunity to clean up some of that mess, because that person might still be hurting and might, it might be some limiting belief, or it might be some poignant thing in their life that they could use for whatever it is. Like I would accredit a lot of some of the conversations I've had with my mother are part of the reason why she lost 40 pounds. Like it had nothing to do with the food. She knew how to do it. She knew how to lose the weight. I don't really coach people on how to lose weight. I try to coach people on like this is the conversation, like whether it's you need to forgive somebody else or you need to forgive yourself, right? And that's ironically more often than not the thing, right? But you're right. Yeah, I look back and being, you know, as I look at the trail of tears behind me, um, I realize I could make a mess like nobody's business. But I'm for what it's worth, I'm proud of the hard decisions I made. A lot of people come to that crossroads in their life and they're too afraid to stand up for what they believe in, for fear of rejection, for fear of the consequences. But most people don't consider the flip side. Like, what's the trade-off on the other side of like, if I went into some marriage that I wasn't wholeheartedly believing in and I didn't have all those other things, like I would have hurt somebody a hell of a lot worse. Um, just like from not giving them the love they deserve to being, whatever. I just think about those things. Like that would have been far worse for them, far worse if we had kids, far worse. Like, but you have to take a long, hard look at like where your life is going and if that's really how you can choose to live. Um, for me, I knew it wasn't worth it. I knew it wasn't worth it. It's like, here's going to be some temporary discomfort. There's going to be some consequences. I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to move on. I'm going to learn. Um, and thankfully, after enough time, I've been able to go back and clean up some of the, I'll call it the loose ends, but some of the hurt that was not intended, and was able to like communicate better as I learned how to become a better communicator because I cared enough. So yeah, that's where I stand today, my friend.
I love it. I think it's great to just have this first glimpse. I mean, this obviously we covered quite a few years, but I think really the focus today was that pivotal moment, with your little French girlfriend. And I think, have you considered reaching out to this girl?
I mm, it was a shorter relationship, so I don't know how much that, and I don't even know if she remembers me. I don't know if that was that meaningful. Maybe I might. Who knows? Some of these things, I'm just like, some people just want to be left alone. So that's sometimes what my like concern is. Like, who am I even that important? Like, who am I to like think my ego is like, and who I was in their world was that special, and that like I might have just been a glimpse, and like this dude just needed to get out of my life. So I think about that sometimes. That could also be me trying to just protect my own ego as well. Um, nah, but if I was to reach out, I'd be like, thank you. Like, you actually gave me a reason. Like, you gave me a very strong reason, and like that bolstered me with some courage to like move my life in this direction. Um,
You're right. Had that not happened, who knows? Maybe, you would have put your head down and followed along. I mean, I doubt, Caleb Nelson in 2020 is part of the Mooney cult, but you never know. And like they say about relationships, a reason, a season, or a lifetime. Hey, maybe she was just there for that reason to push you, and you are the man you are today because of her. So I think it's always important to look back on any past relationship, be it an ex-girlfriend or a friend or a family member, and try to find that value that they brought to your life. Well, as you can hear, there's some construction going on in my house. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's banging pretty loud. So if you wouldn't mind, Caleb, will you wrap up this episode for us? I think it was a really great glimpse for the listeners. We're going to dive deeper into both of our lives, asking questions like this, and hopefully it helped.
For anybody who's ever wondering, this is usually the nature of where any of our coaching stuff goes. So for anybody who wants a deep dive into all this stuff and wants that catharsis at the end, you're just watching it unfold. But for what it's worth, like, there's my dog. You're getting the banging in the background from the construction, but I get
perfect timing.
Perfect timing. But I want to leave everybody with an actionable step this week, is to like look back and be grateful for that first pivotal moment in your life where you made a decision, right? And I think somebody should also take a moment to realize, like, understand that if you didn't make a decision, that's also a decision. Inactivity is also a decision, and taking ownership of that is super important. And I would look back, and for anybody that you're blaming for your problems, try to take a peek back and just go, you know what were the good sides? What was the upside from that? What was the positive trade-off from them doing that? If it was somebody else's fault, if it was something bad, if it was whatever you want to deem it to be. And, take some moments, just like write down what you appreciate from them. And if you feel so inclined, always like reach out and just say thank you for what was given to you. I'm going to leave it off with this, my favorite quote today, as it is a reflection on Caleb Nelson Day. And I have, at many times in my life, most people think I'm out of my mind. My favorite quote is this: "No excellent soul is exempt from a mixture of madness," and that's from Aristotle. And to me, that really means, like, if you're willing to do something amazing, like, people are going to think you're crazy, and that's what it's going to be. You're going to have to feel a little crazy. You're going to have to do some different things. You're going to have to go against the grain a little bit, and you're going to have to stand up for some values for yourself. You're going to have to look at your life a little bit differently than what the status quo is. And it doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's just, if that's the direction you really want to go, that's part of what you have to accept as part of your path. So I hope you found some value in listening to what my little journey to this point, and on some of the things. There's many other layers and other tracks in my life that we'll of course dive into, and I'm looking forward to diving into more with Jay. But that's all we've got for today. Anything else to add, my friend?
No, that's it. I love that quote, and I love what you said earlier about no decision is still a decision. I think that's something people fail to remember.
It's just hammering home that point right there with the construction in the background, but it's all good. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate this. If you know anybody who could use some support, if you could use some more support, by all means, don't hesitate to reach out. We're all about here helping people grow, helping people get better in their life. We would always greatly appreciate you sharing this with anybody else who could use a listen, who needs to just maybe feel a little less crazy, knowing that there's other people who are willing to make some bold decisions in their life as well. And, my final thoughts are, to anybody who has ever taught me the hard lessons, my personal thanks and gratitude goes out to you today. And just know that anybody who ever doesn't think that I don't think about it, like I do, I think about those things all the time. And probably part of my craziness, but I am very, very grateful. If I don't realize it yet, at some point I will. So thank you very much. Aside from that, guys, thank you for joining in on our episode, and we look forward to touching base again next week. Much love.